The unfiltered human on the fringe, radical intimacy. Trust and love without armor, welcome back. You're listening to the unfiltered human on the fringe. Most of us long for intimacy, but we fear it just as deeply. We crave connection, yet we armor ourselves against being fully seen. Somewhere along the way, love becomes performance, trust becomes calculation, and our relationships turn into fortresses that protect us from risk, but also keep us from being touched. But intimacy at its deepest level is radical. It asks us to strip away the armor, to meet another without the safety of masks, to risk trust without guarantees. Radical intimacy is not a soft idea. It is fierce, dangerous, and profoundly human. In this episode, we'll explore why we armor ourselves in relationships and what it costs, how the fortress of false safety isolates more than it protects, why trust is not certainty but a leap into the unknown, how love shifts when we drop the masks of performance, the terrifying gift of being fully known, and how intimacy without armor becomes a path to radical wholeness. Radical intimacy is not about losing yourself in another, nor about merging into safety. It is about standing bare, vulnerable, and real, and discovering that the risk of love is also its gift. Let's begin the fear of nakedness. From the moment we are born, intimacy is our lifeline. To be held, soothed, and mirrored is what allows us to survive. Yet somewhere along the way, intimacy becomes dangerous. We learn that showing our raw selves can lead to rejection, shame, abandonment, or even punishment. So we armor ourselves. We build protections out of silence, perfectionism, humor, control, or withdrawal. And while these strategies may once have kept us safe, they also keep us hidden. We become clothed in defenses, and the fear of nakedness grows. Themes armor as survival, not flaw. Every defense we carry was forged in pain. Silence might have shielded us from humiliation. Perfectionism might have spared us criticism. Withdrawal might have prevented further hurt. Armor was intelligent once, it saved us. But what kept us safe in childhood can imprison us in adulthood. Exposure as risk and necessity. Nakedness feels dangerous because it exposes our most fragile truths. Neuroscience shows that shame activates the brain much like physical pain. To be seen as not enough feels almost unbearable, and yet intimacy demands exposure. We can only be loved to the degree that we are visible. The cultural weight of fear of nakedness is reinforced by the culture we live in. In the UK, during the late 80s and 90s, I noticed how EU-aligned governance brought subtle but powerful policing of language. People whispered, "You can't say that now," silencing their own voices. One word could trigger outrage, and the fear of being socially exiled grew. This wasn't just about individual insecurity, it was systemic. The longing beneath the armor, beneath every layer of defense, lives the same truth. The child who still longs to be seen as they are. The armor may keep pain away, but it also starves intimacy. Nakedness terrifies, yet it is the doorway to being held, recognized, and loved. The paradox of intimacy is that what we fear most is also what we crave most. Attributes protection. Armor is never random. It carries intelligence. It tells the story of how we survived. But when worn too long, it hardens into isolation. Isolation, the fortress that shields us from pain, also walls us off from love. What once comforted us becomes suffocating. Contradiction. We ache to be seen, yet dread being known. We long for closeness, yet recoil from exposure. This contradiction is not a character flaw, but the essence of being human. Yearning. In every guarded silence there is a whisper. Please, see me. Even under the thickest armor, longing persists. Armor and skin. Picture two layers, skin and armor. The armor protects, but it is heavy and dull. Skin, though fragile, is alive, sensitive to touch, warmth, and presence. Intimacy means risking life in the skin, even when armor feels safer. The fear of nakedness is universal. We have all learned that showing too much can be dangerous. Maybe a friend betrayed our secret. Maybe a parent shamed us for crying. Maybe society mocked us for being different. Each time, a layer of armor hardened around us. But here is the paradox. The armor that once protected us also imprisons us. It doesn't only keep out pain, it keeps out intimacy too. Judith Butler reminds us that vulnerability is not weakness, but the very condition of relational life. We are always exposed to others, always dependent on recognition. And Byung-Chul Han argues that in our age of digital transparency, we expose endless data about ourselves, but seldom our fragile selves. We are seen constantly, yet rarely known. The fear of nakedness, then, is not irrational. It is built on lived wounds, reinforced by culture, and amplified by shame. But it is also the barrier we must face if intimacy is ever to become more than performance. Personal reflection growing up, I saw this dynamic unfold in real time. People around me began to suppress their voices, muttering, "I shouldn't say this," or "You can't say that now." It wasn't about kindness or diplomacy, it was fear. Fear of being punished for honesty, fear of being misunderstood, fear of exposure. I remember watching their nervous systems react. A flush of the face, a stumble over words, frustration bubbled when they caught themselves mid-sentence. A single word could derail a connection, triggering outrage or shame. Conversations ended not in understanding, but in silence. As an empathetic child, I felt the suffering, but didn't have the words to explain it. What I absorbed, though, was the lesson. Nakedness was dangerous. If you revealed too much, you'd be shamed or cast out. So I learned to arm myself too. And while that armor gave me safety, it also gave me loneliness. Only later did I realize that every layer of defense was also a wall between myself and the intimacy I longed for. Psychological and philosophical insight. At the individual level, shame researchers like June Tangney and Kristin Neff show how fear of exposure leads people to hide, attack themselves, or lash out. But they also demonstrate that self-compassion and vulnerability transform shame into connection. The moment of nakedness becomes the seed of intimacy. At the group level, Bell Hooks wrote that patriarchal culture trains men to fear tenderness and punishes women for neediness. Families and workplaces replicate this dynamic, demanding toughness and control while silencing openness. In groups, armor becomes collective. Everyone performs, no one reveals. At the societal level, Byung-Chul Han critiques neoliberal transparency culture. We are naked in data, monitored, surveilled, exposed online. But this isn't intimacy. It's performance and control. The deeper nakedness, emotional honesty, and fragile truth are still avoided, often ridiculed. Across all levels, the lesson is clear. Armor has its logic, but intimacy asks for something deeper. Nakedness is not a weakness to be fixed, but the courage to be seen. Embodiment prompt or practice. Close your eyes and place your hands gently on your chest. Whisper to yourself, "Here is where I hide. Here is where I long to be seen." Notice the tension between the two. Just breathe into that contradiction, without forcing it to resolve. Insight prompt. Where do you notice your own armor most? In your family, in friendships, at work, in love? What would it mean to name the fear honestly? Not to strip the armor immediately, but simply to recognize what it has been protecting. Integration moment. The fear of nakedness is not a flaw. It is the echo of wounds that taught us to protect ourselves. But intimacy begins where armor thins. To live radically is to risk being touched, to risk being seen, to risk life in the skin. Seed to plant your armor once saved you. But intimacy asks for the courage of skin. The illusion of safety armor promises safety. The fortress of self-protection tells us, stay hidden, stay controlled, stay guarded, and you won't be hurt. And for a time it works. But the promise is fragile. The fortress not only keeps out pain, it keeps out love, tenderness, and intimacy too. The safety it offers is often an illusion, protection that doubles as imprisonment. Themes: the false security of distance. By holding people at arm's length, we avoid risk, but we also avoid connection. The safety of distance is often loneliness in disguise. Control as defense. We build routines, roles, and performances to control how others see us. Yet control cannot guarantee safety. It only narrows the space where intimacy can live. Safety and isolation as twins. The paradox of armor is that it delivers both security and solitude. What shields us also starves us, breaking the fortress. The illusion cracks when we realize the cost of safety is often greater than the cost of risk. Attributes fortress. Safety becomes a walled city. Others can't hurt us, but they also can't enter. Exile. The fortress that protects also isolates us from belonging. Contradiction. The very thing meant to save us is what keeps us starving. Threshold. Intimacy begins the moment we risk stepping outside the fortress walls. The fortress that crumbles. Picture a fortress, thick with stone and watchtowers. At first, it feels invulnerable, but after years, you realize you are alone inside it. The walls that promise protection now echo with silence. The question emerges: are you safe or are you trapped? The illusion of safety seduces us. I know it has for me. Silence, distance, control, they've all felt like armor against being wounded. But the longer I lived inside them, the more I saw how they cut me off from the very thing I longed for. It's the paradox of intimacy. To protect ourselves from pain, we must also protect ourselves from love. The fortress promises comfort but delivers emptiness. Philosopher Eva Illouz writes about how modern relationships have become shaped by a cold rationality of choice, treating intimacy as risk management. We try to control feelings, control disclosure, control commitment. But love cannot be managed like a business contract. The illusion of safety collapses because intimacy is always uncertain. And trauma theorist Janina Fisher notes that many trauma survivors live in dual awareness, a part of them seeking connection, another part screaming that intimacy is unsafe. The fortress is built on that split. It feels protective, but it leaves us divided, lonely, incomplete. Personal reflection: I've lived inside fortresses of control. For years, I built my safety on routines and rituals that gave me the feeling of being in charge. If I stuck to my structure, if I managed every detail, if I controlled the little things, I believed nothing could fall apart. Those rituals worked in their own way. They kept me steady when my inner world felt unstable. They gave me the illusion of safety, as though order itself could protect me. But the cost was invisible at first. Routines that gave me comfort also fenced me in. I started avoiding spontaneity, even with the people closest to me. Everything had to follow a rule, a rhythm, a pattern. Relationships don't thrive in that kind of rigidity. They need space, flow, unpredictability. And without that, intimacy couldn't breathe. What I thought was protecting me from chaos was actually protecting me from closeness. The fortress felt solid, but inside it I was lonely. The rituals didn't fail me. They simply couldn't give me what I was really longing for. That's the cruel trick of the illusion of safety. It delivers short-term relief, but long-term isolation. Psychological and philosophical insight. At the individual level, Richard Schwartz's internal family systems, IFS, therapy shows how protective parts of us build fortresses around wounded parts. These protectors mean well, but they also prevent intimacy. Healing comes when we thank them for their service and gently invite them to step aside, allowing closeness without collapse. At the group level, sociologist Zygmunt Bauman described our era as liquid love, relationships treated as disposable to avoid vulnerability. Groups and communities play out the same illusion of safety, keeping ties loose to prevent disappointment. Yet this very looseness starves us of belonging. At the societal level, contemporary culture sells us safety through surveillance, risk aversion, and avoidance of offense. But as you've noted in the Inversiverse, safety often becomes a form of control, protecting society not from danger, but from raw, honest encounter. The illusion scales up, a culture that claims to keep us safe, but keeps us isolated from truth. Embodiment prompt or practice. Close your eyes and imagine the walls of your fortress. What do they look like? Silence, humor, perfectionism, control. Picture yourself stepping just outside the gate. What feeling arises? Fear, relief, or longing? Just notice without forcing action. Insight prompt. Where in your life has the promise of safety kept you isolated? What would it mean to see that safety for what it is, not security, but solitude? Integration moment. The fortress promises protection, but its walls are also cages. Safety without risk is exile. To step into intimacy is to let the illusion crumble, to realize that real safety is not armor but connection. Seed to plant. The walls that protect you may also be starving you. Safety without openness is only another kind of loneliness. Trust as leap if armor is how we protect ourselves, and the fortress is where we hide, then trust is the act of stepping outside. But here's the truth. Trust is never certainty. It is always a risk. We often imagine trust as something earned, secured, or guaranteed. But in reality, trust is fragile. It asks us to step onto a bridge without rails, not because we know we won't fall, but because intimacy is impossible unless we walk forward despite the risk. Themes trust as risk, not assurance. Trust is never safe. It is the choice to step into uncertainty with another, the fragility of the bridge. Every act of trust can be broken, and that fragility is part of its meaning. Risk as the condition of intimacy. Without risk, there is no intimacy. Safety without openness is just control. The courage of letting go trust requires loosening the grip of control, allowing another to hold what could harm us. Attributes uncertainty. Trust thrives not in guarantees, but in the unknown. Exposure to trust is to hand someone the key to our vulnerability. Courage. Trust is not naivety, but the bravery to risk connection. Relational faith. Trust is a leap not into certainty, but into possibility. The bridge without rails picture a narrow bridge suspended between two cliffs. There are no rails, no ropes, no safety net. To step onto it feels reckless, but the only way to meet the other side is to walk forward. That is trust, stepping out, not because the bridge is guaranteed to hold, but because love waits on the other side. Trust has always felt like a contradiction to me. On one hand, it's terrifying to give someone the power to hurt me. On the other hand, it's the only way to feel truly connected. Philosopher Nicholas Luhmann once said that trust reduces complexity. We can't calculate every risk, so trust is what lets us move forward despite uncertainty. But intimacy doesn't reduce complexity, it deepens it. To trust is to let someone see us where we are most vulnerable, knowing full well they could misuse that access. Relational neuroscience backs this up. When we trust, our brains release oxytocin, the bonding chemical. But that same openness means our stress response, amygdala, becomes heightened to betrayal. This dual wiring shows that trust is designed to be risky. Its reward and its danger are inseparable. The leap of trust is not into certainty, but into paradox. Knowing harm is possible and stepping forward anyway. Personal reflection. For much of my life, trust was a calculation, something I thought I could manage through control. If I kept routines, if I only let people see certain sides of me, I could reduce the risk. But that wasn't trust, that was safety management. I remember relationships where I wanted intimacy, but couldn't let go of control. I'd share pieces of myself, but always with a hand on the armor. I convinced myself that I was protecting the bond, but really I was preventing it. The fortress followed me even when I longed for closeness. What I learned is that real trust never comes with guarantees. It always feels like stepping onto that bridge without rails. The irony is that every meaningful relationship I've had was only possible when I stopped trying to calculate the risk, when I chose to leap. And yes, sometimes the bridge shook, sometimes it broke. But even then, the act of trusting changed me. Each leap widened my capacity for intimacy, even when the outcome was painful. Psychological and philosophical insight. At the individual level, Esther Perel observes that trust is not static. It is constantly negotiated through micro acts of openness. A person can betray once and rebuild through consistency, or they can fracture it with subtle withdrawals. Trust lives in the daily risk of choosing openness over concealment. At the group level, trust functions like a fragile social contract. Communities that over-police or micromanage destroy the possibility of intimacy between members. Yet those that risk openness, allowing for vulnerability, dissent, even mistakes create deeper bonds. It's why movements rooted in authenticity and transparency often feel magnetic. They risk trust at scale. At the societal level, philosopher Anthony Giddens describes abstract systems of trust, like banks, governments, or tech platforms, which demand we hand over parts of our lives without ever meeting the people in control. Here, the illusion of certainty often masks fragility. As you've explored in the Inversiverse, the danger is when societies replace relational trust with systemic control. Trust without risk becomes compliance, not intimacy. Across all levels, the truth stands. Trust without risk is not trust at all. Embodiment prompt or practice picture someone in your life with whom intimacy feels possible, but fear holds you back. Imagine yourself stepping onto that bridge. What would it mean to reveal one more truth, to offer one more risk of yourself? Breathe into that possibility. Insight prompt. Where in your life are you confusing control for trust? What would it mean to risk one act of openness, even without a guarantee? Integration moment. Trust is never a certainty. It is a leap, fragile and terrifying, but without it, intimacy withers. The bridge without rails is the only way across. Seed to plant trust is not safe. It is the courage to risk being held, even when you could be dropped. Love beyond performance. If trust is the leap across the bridge, then love asks an even greater risk to step off the stage. So much of how we relate is performative. We play roles, the strong one, the easygoing one, the rescuer, the flawless partner, not because they are our truth, but because they keep intimacy manageable. Performance promises acceptance. If I act the part well enough, you won't reject me. But love built on performance is conditional. It is not us that is loved, but the mask we wear. Radical intimacy demands something deeper, the courage to be loved beyond performance. Themes: the mask of roles. We wear roles to protect ourselves, but they keep us from being seen. Conditional versus radical love. Performance invites approval. Nakedness invites love. The death of the stage intimacy begins when we stop rehearsing and start revealing. Love as recognition. To be loved beyond performance is to be recognized as we are, not as we present. Attributes: authenticity. Dropping performance reveals who we are beneath the mask. Risk: the danger of rejection is greater, but so is the chance of being truly loved. Freedom: beyond performance. Intimacy is no longer managed but lived. Recognition: love shifts from approval to encounter. I see you. The stage without masks. Picture a stage lit with spotlights. You've rehearsed your role for years, perfected every line, but one day you realize intimacy can't happen here. To be loved, you must step off the stage, remove the mask, and let someone see the unedited self waiting in the dark wings. Love built on performance is fragile. I know this because I've tried to sustain it. I've played roles in relationships, giving only the parts one thought would be acceptable, hiding the rest. The role worked. It kept rejection at bay for a while, but it also meant the intimacy was hollow. It wasn't me being loved, but the mask. Philosopher Erich Fromm argued that modern love often collapses into performance and possession, what he called pseudo-love. It feels secure, but it lacks authenticity. Real love, he wrote, is not about rehearsing a role, but about giving of the self. Contemporary culture makes this even harder. Social media trains us to curate and perform constantly. Love, too, becomes staged. Filtered images, perfected personas, highlight reels of our intimacy. But performance breeds fragility. When cracks appear, when the mask slips, the love we receive collapses, revealing its conditional nature. Radical intimacy asks for something fiercer. Love without the stage, without the performance, without the guarantee of approval. Personal reflection. I've seen this in my own life. There were times when I performed strength, because I believed that was the only way to be loved. Vulnerability felt too raw, too dangerous. If I could keep the mask on, competent, calm, resilient, then I thought I'd be safe. But that safety was empty. It meant never being fully known. I can remember moments when the mask cracked, when grief or doubt slipped through, and I feared it would ruin everything. But instead, those moments were the ones that brought the deepest closeness. Love only became real when I stopped performing, not because I became flawless, but because I became honest. Psychological and philosophical insight, scenarios and analysis. At the individual level, Carl Rogers' humanistic psychology emphasizes unconditional positive regard. To flourish, people need love without conditions, not approval tied to performance. Masks may protect us from rejection, but they also block us from ever receiving this deeper kind of love. At the group level, sociologist Irving Goffman described social life as dramaturgy, each of us as actors on a stage, managing impressions. But intimacy requires leaving the stage. Groups and relationships that embrace authenticity over performance, spaces where people can be messy, contradictory, and unpolished, generate trust and depth. At the societal level, philosopher Byung-Chul Han critiques today's achievement society, where performance is constant and vulnerability is hidden. Even love becomes productivity, something to optimize. Radical intimacy resists this by refusing performance, choosing instead the mess of authenticity. Across all levels, the lesson is clear. Intimacy dies on the stage. Love only breathes when we step off it. Embodiment prompt or practice. Think of one role you play most often in relationships, the strong one, the easygoing one, the perfect one. Whisper, this is a mask, it kept me safe, but I'm more than this. Notice how your body responds to naming it. Insight prompt. Where in your life are you performing love rather than living it? What would it mean to step off the stage, even briefly, and let yourself be seen without rehearsal? Integration moment performance feels safe, but it starves intimacy. Radical intimacy begins when the mask is dropped, when we risk love without conditions. To be loved beyond performance is to be seen, not staged. Seed to plant intimacy is not applause for your performance. It is recognition of your unmasked self. The gift and risk of being known, to be known fully, is both the deepest gift and the sharpest risk of intimacy. It is the moment where armor drops completely and the raw self is visible. In that space, two possibilities coexist, healing or wounding. When we allow ourselves to be known, we open the door to love that can reach the most hidden places of our being. But the same openness makes betrayal, abandonment, or rejection more devastating. This is the paradox of radical intimacy. It holds the power to restore us or to break us, and often it does both. Themes the double-edged gift. Being fully known allows deep love to flow, but also carries the possibility of deep harm. Intimacy as healing. When we are recognized without condition, old wounds soften and parts of us long exiled can come home. Intimacy as re-trauma. Yet when trust is broken, the wound cuts deeper because it strikes at the place we made most vulnerable. Living the paradox radical intimacy means carrying both realities, love and risk, without demanding certainty. Attributes tenderness, to be known, is to be fragile and soft in another's hands. Exposure. Intimacy opens parts of us we cannot easily protect. Repair. Love has the capacity to soothe and integrate old wounds. Risk intimacy can also reopen those very wounds. The mirror without fog. Imagine standing before a mirror polished so clear that nothing is hidden. For the first time, you see yourself reflected with all imperfections intact. Now imagine another standing beside you, seeing the same. That is intimacy. A mirror without fog, revealing everything, without the option of disguise. To be known is what we long for most. And yet it is also what terrifies us. In relationships, I felt the paradox firsthand. There were times I revealed myself more fully, not just the polished surface, but the messy truth, and the response was acceptance. Those were the moments that healed me most. Yet there were also times when openness was met with silence, judgment, or withdrawal. The hurt went deeper than ordinary rejection, because it struck at the very place I had dared to expose. Neuroscience explains this paradox. The same neural pathways activated in bonding are also those most sensitized in betrayal. This is why intimacy can feel ecstatic and devastating in equal measure. We are wired to experience deep healing through connection, but that wiring also leaves us vulnerable to sharper pain. Philosopher Jean-Luc Nancy described intimacy as the sharing of finitude, two beings revealing their limits, their mortality, their incompleteness. To be known is to let another see the places where we end, and in that both love and loss become possible. Personal reflection. In My Inner Child Was Broken, I wrote about how childhood wounds often shape the way we approach intimacy. I know this in myself, the paradox of craving closeness while fearing exposure. When I allowed someone to see me as I really was, it felt like I was handing them a map to my wounds. Sometimes that risk brought healing. When someone accepted me in those raw places, it felt like a kind of restoration, as if old fractures in me began to knit together. But at other times, the same openness was used against me through mockery, betrayal, or indifference. The pain of those moments was sharper than anything armor could have inflicted, because the wound was made inside the space where I had laid myself bare. What I've learned is that the gift and the risk cannot be separated. They are two faces of the same intimacy. Psychological and philosophical insight. At the individual level, Bessel van der Kolk's work on trauma shows how intimacy can be both repair and re-injury. Safe connection allows trauma survivors to regulate and heal, but unsafe intimacy can trigger and reopen wounds. The paradox is that healing requires the very risk that once harmed us. At the group level, communities often embody the same tension. A group can offer profound belonging when people are truly seen, but exclusion or betrayal within that same group can cause deep collective trauma. The mirror without fog is beautiful when it reflects acceptance, but devastating when it reflects rejection. At the societal level, cultures wrestle with the paradox of exposure. We say we value honesty, yet we punish those who reveal too much. Whistleblowers, truth tellers, artists, and dissidents embody this paradox. They reveal what is hidden and may either be celebrated or destroyed for it. Societies, like individuals, fear the risk of being known. Embodiment prompt or practice. Close your eyes and picture yourself handing someone an invisible key. This key unlocks a part of you usually hidden. Imagine giving it to them. Notice the feelings that arise: fear, relief, and longing. Just breathe into that paradox without needing to resolve it. Insight prompt. Who in your life truly sees you beyond performance, beyond armor? And where have you experienced the double edge of intimacy, healing and wounding entwined? Integration moment. To be known is the deepest risk of intimacy. It is both the wound and the balm. Radical intimacy means daring to live inside that paradox, accepting that the gift and the danger are inseparable. Seed to plant. The places where you are most at risk are also the places where you are most alive. To be known is to risk, but also to heal. Radical intimacy as path. We've walked through the armor, the fortress, the leap, the mask, and the paradox of being known. What remains is the question: what does radical intimacy actually mean for how we live? Radical intimacy is not a one-time act of vulnerability or a fleeting romantic moment. It is a path, a way of being that insists on truth over performance, connection over control, trust over certainty. It does not promise safety, but it does promise depth. Themes intimacy as practice. Radical intimacy is not something we arrive at. It is something we live into over and over with each risk of openness. The refusal of armor. We cannot eliminate fear, but we can choose not to let fear dictate our relationships. Love as mutual recognition. Beyond performance, intimacy is the encounter of two beings seeing and affirming each other without disguise. Spiritual dimensions of intimacy. Radical intimacy points to something larger, a kind of union that transcends ego, a communion that mystics across traditions have recognized. Attributes ongoingness. Intimacy is never complete. It is renewed in each act of trust. Courage, living without armor, requires constant choice, not a one-time gesture. Mutuality. Intimacy is not just personal exposure, but shared vulnerability. Transcendence. Intimacy hints at the sacred, at something beyond survival. The door without locks. Picture a door without locks or bolts. Anyone could enter, which feels terrifying. But when someone steps through with care, it becomes the doorway to the most profound connection of your life. Radical intimacy is that door, unlocked, unguarded, open. Radical intimacy is the path of living unarmored. It doesn't mean we stop being afraid, or that betrayal is impossible. It means we choose to risk anyway. The mystic poet Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Radical intimacy is the path of living in that wound, not sealing it off with armor, but letting it breathe, letting it connect. Philosopher Bell Hooks called love a practice of freedom. To her, intimacy is not about possession or performance, but about the liberation of being seen and seeing another in their fullness. Radical intimacy embodies this freedom, not because it's easy, but because it refuses the cages of fear and control. In every relationship, the path is the same. We step forward trembling, but we step forward anyway. Personal reflection. When I think of radical intimacy as a path, I see all the moments where I could have stayed hidden, behind armor, inside the fortress, on the stage, and how life only deepened when I chose otherwise. It was rarely neat. Sometimes the risk brought closeness, sometimes it brought pain, but every time it widened my capacity for love, for truth, for being human. Looking back, the times I was most alive were not the times I felt safest. They were the times I risked being seen and was met with recognition, even if imperfect, even if fleeting. Those moments stitched me back together more than control ever could. Radical intimacy has never been a destination for me. It is a practice I return to again and again, often clumsily. But each time the path expands. Psychological and philosophical insight. At the individual level, psychoanalyst Jessica Benjamin describes intimacy as mutual recognition, seeing the other as both separate and connected. Radical intimacy thrives in this balance, not fusion, not distance, but recognition. At the group level, spiritual traditions teach the same lesson. In Buddhism, the practice of metta, loving kindness, is intimacy extended outward, an unarmored stance towards self, others, and the world. Communities rooted in this create resilience, not through control, but through compassion. At the societal level, Emmanuel Levinas spoke of the ethical demand of the face of the other. Radical intimacy at scale means recognizing the vulnerability of strangers, not reducing them to roles, categories, or enemies. A society that lives without armor would not be naive, it would be courageous. Embodiment prompt or practice. Place your hand on your heart. Whisper to yourself, I will not live behind walls. I will live with an open door. Feel the rhythm of your heartbeat, both vulnerable and strong, as a reminder of what intimacy demands. Insight prompt. What would it mean for you to walk one step further on the path of radical intimacy? Where might you risk trust, drop performance, or open the door, even a little? Integration moment radical intimacy is not about certainty, safety, or perfection. It is about courage, risk, and recognition. It is about walking without armor into the spaces where love and fear meet. And it is a path, not an arrival, a daily choice to live with the door unlocked. Seed to plant. The path of intimacy is the path of courage. The armor can protect you, but only nakedness lets you be held. Living without armor radical intimacy isn't a single moment of bravery. It is a way of living. To strip away the armor, to step out of the fortress, to risk the leap, to drop the mask, and to let yourself be known. This is the path. It will not always be safe, but it will always be alive. When we risk intimacy, we do more than connect with another person. We rediscover ourselves, the parts that were hidden, silenced, or waiting. The gift of love without armor is not just belonging with another, but becoming whole within ourselves. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. You've been listening to the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe as always. Stay unfiltered, stay human, and keep choosing the door without locks. James Miller. If you found value in today's episode, you may also be interested in my broader project, The Inversiverse, a series exploring the hidden architecture of perception, identity, control, and consciousness. Across 20 episodes, The Inversiverse dissects indoctrination, language, media manipulation, dark psychology, belief systems, and the evolution of self in the digital age. You can find all episodes of The Inversiverse on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and Substack by searching this place called Earth. These ideas aren't shared to convince you, but to invite you to think, feel, and perceive more consciously in a world designed to keep you distracted. Overview of the Inversiverse. A journey through the mirrors of mind, culture, and control. Episodes 1 to 3 introduce foundational ideas around indoctrination, perception, and manipulation. Episode 4 explores how language, symbols, and cultural norms are used to shape thought. Episode 5 investigates control systems, media narratives, and the illusion of choice. Episodes 6 to 7 dives into collective belief structures and the psychology of mass behavior. Episode 8 focuses on marketing, control theory, game theory, and critical thinking. Episode 9 covers love, relationships, human mating, gender dynamics, and red-blue pill ideologies. Episode 10 unpacks dark psychology, the occult, Satanism, and the dark triad personality types. Episode 11 The Simulated Self examines identity, ego, and the rise of post-human consciousness. Episode 12 The Spell of the Mind inquires into language, illusion, and physiology of thought. Episode 13 Conscious Seduction journeys through persuasion, propaganda, and the unseen forces of the mind. Episode 14 The Myth of Sanity sheds light on madness, genius, and the edge of perception. Episode 15 The Algorithmic Mind probes influence, identity, and invisible architects. Episode 16 The Noise of Knowing reveals overload obsession and the age of infinite information. Episode 17 Belief Machines delves further into language, desire, and the engine of reality. Episode 18 Submerged Signals examines how the unseen shapes the self. Episode 19 The Alchemy Within Traces, Food, Frequency, and the Forgotten Intelligence of the Body. Episode 20 Encoded Flesh scrutinizes and opens up to the forgotten language of the body, DNA, and biological consciousness.